Welcome to the Museum Roadshow. I'm Roger Engstrom, lifetime resident of Becker County. Today we're down here at the Becker County Fairgrounds talking about the country schools. And when I was in country school, I was fortunate to have Paul Ness for a teacher. Paul Ness taught at the Rochester School, District 57, and I have to give Paul Ness a lot of credit for teaching me to read. Because when I entered fourth grade, he picked up on that right away, that Roger doesn't know how to read and we've got to do some special work with him. So he'd send me out in the hall where the furnace was located, and I would sit with one of the girls in my class or a class above me, and I would have to continue reading the lesson over and over until I read it good enough for them, and then I could read it for Paul. Then we'd go on to the next lesson. And as I look back and think about this, I saw how reading was taught in town schools, and after that they had these plans and all these big ideas, but I have to give credit to Paul Ness, because he was the one that got me going on the right track with reading in school.
I was very proud of our forefathers, because when they came to America from the Scandinavian and the Germany and those countries, the first thing they thought about is educating their children. So farmers would get together and build a frame schoolhouse. It wasn't very big, but there weren't that many students either, but it doubled as a church on Sunday because they couldn't build both at the same time. And then after the schools got organized, and they built their own church. And then in addition to that, later on, a little store was built by the school and the church. So they had many little communities of the church and the school and the little store.
In country school, you had pupils that were in the beginning years and then all the way through the 8th grade, all in one room. And you had to plan activities that would be suitable for the whole group. Of course, there were some things that would have to be suitable more for the lower grades, and then something for the middle group, and then the upper grades would have something else.
It was fun, and we were organized. I had my little $12 Benris watch. It's the only timepiece we had, and I didn't know how accurate it was. No big, clocks or anything. And the school itself, I always put the flag out first thing in the morning. I had a flagpole right outside the door. And I always put the flag up, and the kids always said, Pledge of Allegiance. In the front, we had Lincoln and Washington. On the back, the 10 Commandments. It was all very important. And so I rang the bell. The kids all came in neatly, carrying their syrup pails. They each had their own hook, and the syrup pail always stood underneath the coats. And many times the food was frozen by the time the kids got to school. And the first thing we did is, after the Pledge of Allegiance, where they stood at attention, then we had opening exercises for 15 minutes. And I usually had singing in the morning. We didn't even have as much as a phonograph, and I wasn't much of a singer. But the war was on, and so we sang all the patriotic songs every single day. And the kids knew them all by heart. And then after that, then we started out reading first. I was first grade, went through all the grades, maybe 10 minutes. I figured out I had about 30 classes a day. And the little ones came first, and they had just a little story of Dick and Jane and the baby, And then they would go back then and practice reading, or else they could go to the little library and get a book. But they would be quiet as long as the others sat in the front row for their classes. There may be only 2 or 3 in each class. And the reading took maybe the fourth, and the opening exercises took the first till 10:15, and then we had recess. And then you could all go outside. And then while they were outside playing, I would put work on the board. We didn't have workbooks the first year I was teaching. So they had to copy all their problems down. And we didn't have real good books, but we did have, arithmetic book. I think Stratton Upton made that.
Then we'd come back in and we'd have our math classes. And that usually took quite a period of time, because you go through 8 classes in the 10 to 12 or 11:30 sometimes in some schools, having maybe an hour break at noon.
And then every noon they'd have to wash their hands, and we had a little porcelain basin and some of that good yellow soap, yellow-green soap that the teacher put in the mouth of the kids that said bad words, you know. And they always got their syrup pails, put them on their desk, and each one stood by the desk and we said table grace. And ate and then put everything away. And they didn't have a lot for lunch, maybe 2 sandwiches and an apple and maybe a cookie. Then they would go outside and play ball, and I usually went out and played ball with them because I always played the catcher. And when it was nice. And in the wintertime, then of course they played indoors.
One thing I remember is we had a hot meal. We would bring a potato from home and put on the old stove, and in the morning and by noon we would have our baked potato, which was kind of a treat rather than cold lunches all the time.
And after lunch, in order to settle them down, then we had story time. And I read books like the Bobbsey Twins and Rebecca at the Sunnybrook Farm and the Hardy Boy books, and we tried to pick out little men and little women so it'd be appealing to both boys and girls.
We'd have language classes and little citizenship classes. We didn't have much of a textbook at that time, but there was one that would help us out. And we'd get the current events, and that made a big help too. And we'd have health classes. We didn't have all of these classes every day. We'd have one day and one the next, and so on. Then on Friday afternoon, it was always artwork. That was the last quarter of the day. We'd have pictures to finish that we'd cut out, you know, and coloring to do, and well, whatever fit each group. And I just loved to put up their artwork, display it on the wall.
We ran out of time this week, so we'll look next week for more stories about the country schools.